Liverpool versus Manchester United, Real Madrid versus Barcelona, and Argentina versus Brazil. Fierce rivalries are often considered an integral part of football and fan culture more generally. With all those rivalries mentioned, the hatred is as fierce on either side, often rooted in competitive, cultural, and sometimes even religious differences and reasons. That is not the case with all rivalries, some of which are far more firmly felt on one side than the other. Growing up as a Hull City fan at the time which I did, pretty much all of our rivalries were like that. The likes of Scunthorpe United, Grimsby Town, Lincoln City and York City fans may all consider Hull City to be their rivals, but since we have rarely been on a level playing field with any of them for most of my lifetime, I can't say I hold any ill will or dislike towards any of them. Similarly, many Hull City fans would consider Leeds United, Sheffield United and Sheffield Wednesday to be our biggest rivals, but supporters of those clubs have much fiercer reciprocal rivalries, most notably in the case of Sheffield United and Wednesday, with each other, and have historically been unmoved by games against Hull. It is an important distinction to make that I'm talking about one-sided rivalries in terms of feelings and emotions, not success or head-to-head records. The rivalry between Espanyol and Barcelona, or Dynamo Kiev and Arsenal Kiev, just as two examples, are very one-sided in terms of the size of the respective clubs, but there is a mutual hatred, so they won't feature. If this video is a success, and people would like to see it, I'd be more than happy to make a similar video looking at rivalries which are one-sided in that sense too. For now though, here are 7 of the most emotionally one-sided rivalries in world football. Leicester City versus Derby County, or Nottingham Forest. As a Hull City fan, I can sympathise with Leicester City fans, who support a club with no truly mutual rivalry. In fact, back when Nigel Pearson left Hull City to return to Leicester City, there was a very brief beef between the Foxes and the Tigers, and perhaps it would have been best for both parties if they could have somehow made each other their primary rivals. Of course, now Leicester are very good, and we are not, so that's unlikely to happen anytime soon. Anyhow, according to polls, Leicester City fans consider Nottingham Forest to be their main rivals, and Derby County their second biggest rivals, with those 3 clubs competing in 3 different East Midlands derbies. Sadly for the Foxes, Forest and Derby are far too concerned with each other and have one of the most two-sided rivalries within the English game to spare too much fault for Leicester. In addition, Nottingham Forest have near neighbours Notts County for company, while some Derby County fans would hold more of a grudge towards Leeds than Leicester. No doubt things would be very different had Brian Clough ever managed the Foxes. Leicester do have a more reciprocal derby with Coventry City, known as the M69 derby, but that too has become difficult to maintain in recent years given Leicester's rise and Coventry's fall. NAC Breda versus Feyenoord. NAC Breda are an interesting football club for a number of reasons, not least because their initialised name NAC Breda, when extrapolated to its full meaning, literally translates to never give up, always persevering, pleasant by entertainment, and useful by relaxation, combination Breda, which is one hell of a name. Based in the fortified city of Breda, which is equidistant between the port cities of Rotterdam and Antwerp, NAC are one-time Dutch champions, a title they won way back in 1921. By virtue of their geography, NAC Breda's biggest rivalry is with Willem II, who are based in the neighbouring city of Tilburg. That rivalry runs both ways, but NAC's second biggest rivalry with Dutch giants Feyenoord most assuredly does not. Although only 50 kilometres separates the two clubs, for the most part, Feyenoord fans bear no ill will towards Breda. The rivalry on Breda's part reportedly stems from violence and hooliganism at matches between the two clubs in the 1970s, but if that is the case, it's a wonder that they don't have rivalries with virtually every team. Feyenoord's biggest rivals, and the biggest rivalry within the Dutch game, is of course with Ajax, whilst they do also have their neighbour Sparta to occupy them at times as well. Queen's Park Rangers versus Chelsea. The West London derby is one of English football's more unusual derbies, comprising of 4 teams, namely Brentford, Fulham, QPR and Chelsea. The rivalry is unusual in as much as the teams have not consistently competed at similar levels of football, and Chelsea are by a considerable distance considered to be the biggest and most successful of the quartet. The Blues are 6-time champions of England and 8-time FA Cup winners, and they haven't dropped out of the top flight since the 1980s. Fulham and QPR both consider Chelsea to be their biggest rivals, meanwhile Brentford rank them 3rd behind the other 2. Yet Chelsea don't consider any of those 3 to be among their 3 biggest rivals, with the most recent surveys listing Tottenham Hotspur, Arsenal and Manchester United as the Blues' biggest rivals, in that order. A lot of that comes by virtue of the fact that Chelsea have been a very competitive club, particularly during the last couple of decades, thus creating more competitive rivalries with the likes of Arsenal and Manchester United. Blues fans did pick Fulham as their fourth fiercest rivals, but QPR were nowhere to be found, and as such, are more than worthy of a spot in 5th place. Belgium versus the Netherlands. International football is not immune from the phenomenon of one-way rivalries, and in 4th is a rivalry that makes perfect geographical sense. The Low Countries derby between Belgium and the Netherlands is the 3rd most frequently contested international rivalry in world football, trailing only games between Uruguay and Argentina and Austria and Hungary, with Belgium and the Netherlands having met 125 times. Despite all those meetings, the fact that the two countries are of similar size and that they border each other, Netherlands fans have never been particularly moved by Belgium. That is because Belgium were rarely seen as a force within world football, routinely failing to qualify for major finals and only having gone deep into a World Cup once prior to their current golden generation. That is because Belgium were rarely seen as a force within world football, routinely failing to qualify for major finals and only having gone deep into a World Cup once prior to their current golden generation. The record between the two teams is surprisingly similar given the historic golfing class, but Belgium view beating the Netherlands as a significant achievement. The Netherlands, meanwhile, are more preoccupied by their rivalries with France, and most bitterly of all, of course, with the Germans. Of course, it is no longer the case that Belgium are not a force within world football, but the animosity in situations like this always takes a while to really build momentum, and it will probably take another generation of Belgian competitiveness before a two-sided rivalry really settles in. Gymnasia versus Estudiantes. There are only 6 cities in Argentina where the majority of the population don't support either River Plate or Boca Juniors, and La Plata is one of those cities. La Plata's 2 football clubs are Gymnasia and Estudiantes, and according to Wikipedia, the La Plata derby is one of the most fiercely contested derbies in Argentinian football. That is certainly true on the part of Gymnasia, but if you speak to most Estudiantes supporters, they seem a lot more relaxed in their feelings towards Gymnasia. As is so often the case, the rivalry was once seen as one representative of a class divide, Gymnasia, the team of the working class, and Estudiantes, the team of the middle class. That stereotype has waned over the years, but Gymnasia's hatred of Estudiantes certainly has not. Back in April 1992, Uruguayan midfielder Jose Perdomo scored a goal for Gymnasia against Estudiantes, which caused the stadium to erupt to such an extent that the local astronomical observatory registered a low-intensity seismic event. In other words, what they would consider to be a small earthquake. Estudiantes are 6-time champions of Argentina and 4-time Libertadores winners, the 3rd most of any club in South America. Gymnasia have won just 1 league title back in 1929 and no Libertadores, and any hatred from Estudiantes fans has largely been tamed by the perceived gap between the two clubs. Gymnasia are currently managed by Diego Maradona, meanwhile Estudiantes chairman is one of La Plata's most famous sons, Juan Sebastian Barón. Bournemouth versus Southampton. Sometimes a derby can be one-sided because one team has historically been much better than the other, and sometimes it's simply because one team has a much fiercer rivalry with another club. In the case of Bournemouth and Southampton, it is a case of both of the above. The rivalry, which is known as the South Coast Derby between Southampton and Portsmouth, is among the most bitter rivalries in the English game in a local sense, with serious animosity between the two sets of supporters. In recent years, Portsmouth's demise has seen few fixtures between the two, but the hatred has not diminished. In Pompey's absence, both Bournemouth and Brighton have won promotion to the Premier League, and Sky Sports has billed games between the 3 clubs as another South Coast derby. Saints fans have always been quick to distance themselves from any fabricated rivalry with either, though, reserving all their hatred solely for the club from Fratton Park. Conversely, a poll of Bournemouth fans found that they do indeed consider Southampton to be their fiercest rivals, followed by Reading and then Brighton. Southampton fans obviously picked out Portsmouth as their fiercest rivals, followed by Brighton and then Bournemouth, with the other two very much an afterthought. Portsmouth, meanwhile, didn't even rank Bournemouth among their top 4, picking Southampton and then Brighton, Millwall and Leicester as a very distant second and joint third. These things can of course change with time should Bournemouth continue to compete and Pompey fail to return to the top tier, but right now it's incredibly one-sided. England versus Germany. The most one-sided rivalry in all of world football. If you speak to most Germans, they are baffled as to why England even consider the Germans to be their rivals. Of course, England and Germany did have a couple of famous spats at the start of the 20th century, but if England were to maintain rivalries with every nation they've ever been to war with, virtually every game would be a rivalry. There are, after all, only 22 countries which Britain or England hasn't invaded, and it is rare that the 3 lions come up against Chad or the Vatican City on the international stage. The real reason for England's hatred towards Germany within the world of football is of course born out of our dreadful record against the Germans. Whilst the head-to-head record between the two nations is roughly neck and neck, in competitive fixtures, England have only beaten Germany in the 1966 World Cup final and in 2002 World Cup qualification. Germany have knocked England out of the 1970 World Cup, the 1990 World Cup, the 1996 European Championships, and the 2010 World Cup. The defeats at Italia 90 and Euro 96 in particular, as the closest England had come to a major trophy since 66, and having both gone to penalties, caused a feeling of real rivalry on England's part. Polling has found that most England fans consider the rivalry with Germany to be bigger than England's rivalries with Scotland and Argentina, despite the fact that those two are very much reciprocated. German fans, meanwhile, consider a game against England as no different to a game against any other big national team, whether it be Spain or France. By far and away, Germany's biggest rivals on the international stage are the Netherlands, a rivalry with plenty of hatred on both sides. Oddly enough, Germany has a rivalry with Italy, which is very similar to England's rivalry with them, inasmuch as it is born largely out of an inability to beat Italy when it matters most. As such, Italians don't feel any real hatred towards Germany, but in Germany, a game against Italy is viewed as significant. That's it for today's video. There are plenty of others I could have mentioned. Let me know any that you think I should have in the comments, and as always, give us a like if you enjoyed the video, and make sure you are subscribed to HITC Sevens.